Oppenheimer. The film Oppenheimer follows the story of Julius Robert Oppenheimer, the cerebral, charismatic, and tortured physicist who was tapped to lead the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, New Mexico, to build the atomic bomb during World War II. The subsequent bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war against Japan in 1945, and Oppenheimer was hailed as a hero. Many physicists, including Albert Einstein, were disappointed that the United States had dropped the bomb without warning on an enemy that was already defeated, while Oppenheimer hoped that the advent of bomb would make war unthinkable and lead to international control on such weapons. One of the touching points of the film was when Robert Oppenheimer met President H.S. Truman for the first time after the atom bomb had been dropped on Japan. Truman had made the decision to drop the bombs. Mr. President, Oppenheimer said, I feel I have blood on my hands. The president was not impressed. He stood up to signal that the meeting was over. In a letter to the Secretary of State the next year, Truman referred to Oppenheimer as a crybaby scientist. That was a massive moment of disillusion, a huge turning point for Oppenheimer in his approach to trying to deal with the consequences of what he had been involved with. In 1954, his security clearance was revoked in an infamous hearing of advisors to the Atomic Energy Commission that declared him a security threat based on the leftist ties at the University of California, Berkeley, and his opposition to building an even bigger bomb, that is, hydrogen bomb. In a later interview, Oppenheimer said that after the atomic explosions, he felt, now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds, and was reminded of, if the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once in the heavens, that would be like the splendor of the mighty Lord. Both quotes are from the Bhagavad Gita. Oppenheimer evidently was suffering from a prick of conscience. On the one hand, he had undertaken a scientific task and had executed it efficiently. On the other hand, his moral sense had started to strangulate him. Science and conscience both attempt to understand what is right and what is wrong. However, the scope of conscience is personal, while that of science is shared. The conscience of a scientist often faces a dilemma in deciding between right and wrong. Many scientists are detached from the human affairs. They believe that they are engaged in understanding and deciphering the laws of nature, which are immutable. Hence, The reactions of others and their emotions are irrelevant to the study of nature. However, science touches our lives in deep and meaningful ways. Therefore, even a scientist whose contributions to science are completely theoretical needs to be concerned about what is right and what is wrong. Julius Robert Oppenheimer. Julius Robert Oppenheimer was born into a Jewish family in New York City in 1904. His father was born in Hanover, and as a teenager, his father made his way to the United States in 1888 without money, higher education, or even English. He was hired by a textile company and within a decade was an executive there, eventually becoming wealthy. Oppenheimer was a versatile student interested in English and French literature and particularly mineralogy. He entered Harvard College in 1922 at the age 18. He majored in chemistry. Harvard also required studies in history, literature, and philosophy or mathematics. To compensate for the delay caused due to his illness during the previous year, he took 6 courses each term instead of the usual 4 courses. After being accepted at Christ's College, Cambridge in 1924, Oppenheimer wrote to Ernest Rutherford requesting permission to work at the Cavendish Laboratory. Rutherford was unimpressed with his performance. Nonetheless, Oppenheimer went to Cambridge. He was very unhappy at Cambridge and wrote to a friend, I am having a pretty bad time. The lab work is a terrible bore, and I am so bad at it that it is impossible to feel that I am learning anything. Oppenheimer was a tall, thin, and chain smoker who often neglected to eat during periods of intense concentration. He was plagued by periods of depression throughout his life. He always knew what were the important problems as shown by his choice of subjects. He truly lived with those problems, struggling for a solution, and he communicated his concerns to the group of his students. In its heyday, there were about 8 or 10 graduate students in his group and about 6 postdoctoral fellows. He met this group once a day in his office and discussed with one after another the status of the student's research problem. He was interested in everything, and in one afternoon, they might discuss quantum electrodynamics, cosmic rays, electron pair production, and nuclear physics. His students and colleagues saw him as mesmerizing, hypnotic in private interaction, but often frigid in more public settings. Oppenheimer's papers were considered difficult to understand even by the standards of the abstract topics he was expert in. He was fond of using elegant, if extremely complex, mathematical techniques to demonstrate physical principles, Though he was sometimes criticized for making mathematical mistakes, presumably out of haste. His physics was good, said his student Snyder, but his arithmetic awful. As far as we know, he never wrote a long paper or did a long calculation, anything of that kind. He did not have patience for that. His own work consisted of little abacus but quite brilliant ones. But he inspired other people to do things, and his influence was fantastic. Oppenheimer's mother died in 1931, and he became closer to his father, who, although still living in New York, became a frequent visitor in California. When his father died in 1937, leaving 8 million US dollars to be divided between Oppenheimer and his brother Frank, Oppenheimer immediately wrote out a will that left his estate to the University of California to be used for graduate scholarships. Many of Oppenheimer's closest associates were active in the Communist Party in 1930s or 1940s, including his brother, his wife, and his landlady, and several of his graduate students at Berkeley University. Whether Oppenheimer was a party member has been debated. He liked things that were difficult, and since much of the scientific work appeared easy for him, he developed an interest in the mystical and the cryptic. After leaving Harvard, he began to acquaint himself with the classical Hindu texts through their English translations. He also had an interest in learning languages and learned Sanskrit at Berkeley in 1933. He eventually read literary works such as the Bhagavad Gita and Meghdota in the original Sanskrit and deeply pondered them. He later cited the Gita as one of the books that most shaped his philosophy of life. He wrote to his brother that the Bhagavad Gita was very easy and quite marvelous, and called it the most beautiful philosophical song existing in any known tongue. He later gave copies of it as presents to his friends and kept a personal, worn out copy on the bookshelf by his desk. He nicknamed his car Garuda, the mount bird of the Hindu god Vishnu. Oppenheimer never became a Hindu in the traditional sense. He did not join any temple nor pay to any god. He was really taken by the charm and the general wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita. Oppenheimer's interest in Hindu thought started during his earlier association with Niels Bohr. Both Niels Bohr and Oppenheimer had been very analytical and critical about the ancient Hindu mythological stories and the metaphysics embedded in them. In one conversation with David Hawkins before the war, while talking about the literature of ancient Greece, Oppenheimer remarked, I have read the Greeks. I find the Hindus deeper. According to a 1949 magazine profile, while witnessing the explosion, Oppenheimer thought of verses from the Bhagavad Gita. If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst at once into the sky, that would be like the splendor of the mighty one. Now I am become death, the shatterer of worlds. In 1965, he recalled the moment this way. We knew the world would not be the same. A few people laughed, a few people cried, most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another. Despite many scientists' opposition to using the bomb on Japan, Oppenheimer believed that a test explosion would not convince Japan to surrender. At an August 6 assembly at Los Alamos, the evening of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, Oppenheimer took to the stage and clasped his hands together like a prize winning boxer while the crowd cheered. He expressed regret that the weapon was ready too late for use against Nazi Germany. On August 17, however, Oppenheimer traveled to Washington to hand deliver a letter to Secretary of War Mr. Henry L. Stimson expressing his revulsion and his wish to see nuclear weapons banned. In October, he met the President Harry S. Truman, who dismissed Oppenheimer's concern about an arms race with the Soviet Union and belief that atomic energy should be under international control. Truman became infuriated when Oppenheimer said, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Later, responding, Truman said, "Blood on his hands? Damn it. He hasn't half as much blood on his hands as I have. You just don't go around bellyaching about it. I don't want to see him in my office again." Jacob Kurian. Jacob Kurian is a former scientist. He remembers Julius Robert Oppenheimer as the father of quantum physics in the US rather than the father of the atomic bomb. Kurian obtained his master's degree from Madras University. He joined Oppenheimer when he was just 25. In fact, he was one of the last two appointments made by Oppenheimer to the physics group. Kurian was assigned an office right below Oppenheimer's office. I did not have many interactions with him. At the time, he was traveling to New York for his treatment. You know, he was a chain smoker. He used to go by train. I used to see him around and one day made an appointment to meet him. He very graciously made time for me. I knocked on the door to his private office. He opened the door, welcomed me, and walked me to the chair and pulled it out so that I could get seated, and then went to the other side of the table and sat in his chair. I still remember that. How gracious. Many others have appreciated that about him. We spent a good hour talking about physics. Talking about Oppenheimer and the Times then, Kurian said, there was a huge number of people on staff who had dealt with Professor Oppenheimer, and so I was steeped in that environment. There was a lot of concern at the time about the atomic bomb and what it would do in the Western world. People were saying Russia had the bomb, and when would China have it? They never talked of India having it, though. After Einstein, Oppenheimer was the most important figure in physics at the time. True, he did not win the Nobel. He would have won it had he not been in the Manhattan Project. He had done very important work in quantum physics, including the correct identification of the anti-electron in the Dirac equation, as well as speculation on the black hole. There seems to be many misstatements, including the one that he spoke 5 different languages, one of which was Sanskrit. Oppenheimer had learned Sanskrit and had read the Hindu scriptures, especially the Gita, says Mr. Kurian. The splitting of uranium was accomplished in Germany. Werner Heisenberg, who developed quantum mechanics, was in Germany and suspected to head the bomb construction project for the Nazis. Compared to them, the US had young, inexperienced scientists. It was like building a championship team from raw recruits. That was Oppenheimer's accomplishment. When approached to build the atomic bomb, he did it out of a conviction that it would end the world war, which it did. The prevailing thought was Japan was defeated, but to make them surrender, a land invasion would be necessary and could have resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans. One proposal was to have a demonstration of the devastation the bomb could bring out in hindsight, even after 100,000 deaths. Japan. Before the Pearl Harbor attack, tensions between Japan and the United States had been mounting for the better part of a decade. The United States began passing economic sanctions against Japan, including trade embargoes on aircraft exports, oil, and scrap metal, among other key goods. While the United States hoped embargoes on oil and other key goods would lead Japan to halt its expansionism, the sanctions and other penalties actually convinced Japan to stand its ground and stirred up the anger of its people against continued Western interference in Asian affairs. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese military launched a surprise attack on the US naval base at Pearl Harbor. Japanese forces trained for about a year to prepare for the attack. The Japanese attack force, which included 6 aircraft carriers and 420 planes, sailed on a 3,500-mile voyage to launch the attack. Japanese torpedo bombers flew just 50 feet above the waters as they fired at the US ships in the harbor, while other planes strafed the decks with bullets and dropped bombs. The attack killed more than 2,000 service members and wounded around 1,700 more and sank or destroyed 6 US ships. They also destroyed 169 US Navy and Army airplanes. In May 1940, the United States had made Pearl Harbor the main base for its Pacific Fleet. As Americans didn't expect the Japanese to attack first in Hawaii, some 4,000 miles away from Japanese mainland, the base at Pearl Harbor was left relatively undefended, making it an easy target. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto spent months planning an attack that aimed to destroy the Pacific Fleet and destroy morale in the US Navy so that it would not be able to fight back as Japanese forces began to advance on targets across the South Pacific. At first, however, the Pearl Harbor attack looked like a success for Japan. Its bombers hit all 8 US battleships, sinking 4 and damaging 4 others, destroyed or damaged more than 300 aircraft, and killed some 2,400 Americans at Pearl Harbor. Japanese forces went on to capture a string of current and former Western colonial possessions by early 1942, including Burma, now Myanmar, British Malaya, now Malaysia and Singapore, and Dutch East Indies, now Indonesia, and the Philippines, giving them access to these islands' plentiful natural resources, including oil and rubber. But the Pearl Harbor attack had failed in its objective to completely destroy the Pacific Fleet. The Japanese bombers missed oil tanks, ammunition sites, and repair facilities, and not a single US aircraft carrier was present during the attack. In June 1942, this failure came to haunt the Japanese as US forces scored a major victory in the Battle of Midway, decisively turning the tide of war in Pacific. Testing of the gadget. A plutonium bomb called the Gadget was tested at Trinity site near Alamogordo, New Mexico on July 16, 1945 at 5:29 am. 2 days before the Trinity test, Oppenheimer expressed his hopes and fears in a quotation from Bhartrhari's Satkatraya. In battle, in the forest, at the precipice in the mountains, on the dark great sea, in the midst of javelins and arrows, in sleep, in confusion, in the depths of shame, the good deeds a man has done before defend him. On 6th August 1945 at 8:15, the first atom bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, was dropped on Hiroshima. This gun-type uranium bomb was dropped from 31,000 feet. The bomb exploded about 1,500 feet above the city. The name of the plane was Enola Gay, named after the pilot's mother. The bomb destroyed 5 square miles of the city. Still, Hirohito, the longest serving emperor of Japan, refused to surrender, and a second bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki 3 days after, that is, on 9th August 1945 at 11 hours 1 minute. The B 29 boxcar plane, named after Frederick Bach, who was the usual pilot, dropped the bomb from 29,000 feet. The bomb exploded 1,650 feet above the slope of the city. The primary target was Kokura Arsenal, but because of unacceptable weather conditions and anti aircraft gunfire at Kokura, Major Sweeney decided to switch to this secondary target, Nagasaki. The bomb destroyed 3 square miles of the city. On 2nd September 1945, Japan signed the official instrument of surrender to US. Oppenheimer was nominated for the Nobel Prize for Physics 3 times, that is, in 1946, 1951, and 1967, but never won. On February 18, 1967, he died in his sleep at his home in Princeton, aged 62 years. Thank you for listening. Now, some difficult words used in the above passage and their meanings. The film Oppenheimer follows the story of Julius Robert Oppenheimer, the cerebral, charismatic, and tortured physicist who was tapped to lead the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, New Mexico. Cerebral, Cerebral. Cerebral means intellectual. Physicist, Physicist. Physicist means an expert in physics. Tapped to lead the Manhattan Project. Tapped means exploited, fully utilized. The subsequent bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war against Japan in 1945, and Oppenheimer was hailed as a hero. Hail, Hail. Hail means to praise a person comparing to someone or something very good. Science and conscience both attempt to understand what is right and what is wrong. Conscience, Conscience. Conscience means a person's moral sense of right or wrong. Many scientists are detached from human affairs. They believe that they are engaged in understanding and deciphering the laws of nature. Decipher, Decipher. Decipher means convert a text written in code or a coded signal into normal language. Oppenheimer was a versatile student. Versatile, Versatile. Versatile means able to do many different things. As far as we know, he never wrote a long paper or did a long calculation, anything of that kind. He didn't have patience for that. His own work consisted of little abacus, but quite brilliant ones. Abacus, Apgcus. Abacus means a comment or brief reference that makes an illuminating or entertaining point. After leaving Harvard, he began to acquaint himself with the classical Hindu texts through their English translations. Acquaint, Acquaint. Acquaint means make someone familiar with. He also had an interest in learning languages and learned Sanskrit at Berkeley in 1933. He eventually read literary works such as the Bhagavad Gita and Meghdota in the original Sanskrit and deeply pondered them. Ponder, P O N D E R, ponder means to think about something carefully. Oppenheimer's interest in Hindu thought started during his earlier association with Niels Bohr. Both Niels Bohr and Oppenheimer had been very analytical and critical about the ancient Hindu mythological stories and the metaphysics embedded in them. Metaphysics, Metaphysics, metaphysics means the branch of philosophy that studies the fundamental nature of reality like existence, identity, change, space and time, necessity, actuality, possibility, etc. On August 7, however, Oppenheimer traveled to Washington to hand deliver a letter to the Secretary of War, Henry L. Stimson, expressing his revulsion and his wish to see nuclear weapons banned. Revulsion, Revulsion, revulsion means disgusting. In October, he met with President Harry S. Truman, who dismissed Oppenheimer's concern about an arms race with the Soviet Union and belief that atomic energy should be under international control. Truman became infuriated when Oppenheimer said, Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands. Infuriate. Infuriate. Infuriate means make someone extremely angry. Truman, responding later, said, blood on his hands? Damn it. He hasn't half as much blood on his hands as I have. You just don't go around bellyaking about it. Bellyac, Bellyache. Bellyac means complain noisily. When approached to build the atomic bomb, he did it out of a conviction that it would end the world war, which it did. Conviction, Conviction. Conviction means a firmly held belief or opinion. The United States began passing economic sanctions against Japan, including trade embargoes on aircraft exports, oil and scrap metal, among other key goods. Embargoes, Embargoes. Embargo means an official ban on trade and other commercial activity with a particular country. Japanese torpedo bombers flew just 50 feet above the water as they fired at the US ships in the harbor, while other planes strafed the decks with bullets and dropped bombs. Strafe, Strafe. Strafe means punish severely. In June 1942, this failure came to haunt the Japanese as US forces scored a major victory in the Battle of Midway. Come back to haunt means to cause problems for someone in the future. Thank you for listening.